Cultural and social evolution. Animal behavior is traditionally regarded as instinctive, innate, and hardwired in the genome, or learned and so subjected to experience. So, cultural or social evolution has been most thoroughly revealed through the study of instincts, behavior, imitation, learning, and the manufacture and use of tools. In the natural habitat, imitation and the passing on of skills from one generation to the next through learning are seen in chimpanzee tool making and tool use. Individuals, genes, and environment all interact in culture and social behavior. Modern humans possess two models or modes of inheritance. One is phenotypic and based on inheritance of DNA passed down from generation to generation genetically. The second is cultural social inheritance based on imitation, experience, and learning passed down from generation to generation through tradition. So, cultural evolution has outpaced phenotypic evolution for much of human history. The first recognition of human social evolution came in applying Darwin's evolutionary ideas to society, in what come to be known as social Darwinism. Cultural evolution is often, through though inappropriately, couched to the how much is nature and how much is nurture. In the mid 1970s, seeking answers to nature nurture question led to the development of sociobiology, the systematic study of the biological basis of social behavior. Then, instincts and learned behavior. Rarely complex innate behaviors, often called instincts, may involve many behavioral components. For example, the courtship patterns of most animals and the dancing patterns used by honeybees to communicate the direction and distance of food sources. Whether simple or complex, innate behaviors are often uniform within a species and therefore seem to be entirely or almost entirely under genetic control. Indeed, genes and their associated neuroanatomical locations associated with courtship behaviors have been identified in Drosophila, and in the organisms, male female sexual orientation can be reversed genetically. So, genetic components underlying learned behavior have been widely investigated. For example, genes in different breeds of dogs influence tameness, playfulness, and aggressiveness in mice. Knocking out a gene disabled has no observable effect other than on social behavior, causing reduced social interaction and deficit nest building. There is much evidence that genes are involved in human nervous system disorders that alter human behavior. Schizophrenia and manic depression are two well studied examples. The capacities of most behavioral traits, like so many other adaptations, result from evolutionary selective forces because in some groups an individual can modify its behavior to suit different environmental or social circumstances. Learned behavior can be more responsive to environmental changes than our instinctive or innate behaviors. Much learned behavior derived from practice, allowing individuals to modify their behavior on their basis of their own or other past experiences, as seen in chimpanzees and monkeys learning to use and manipulate tools. Tool making by Caledonian crows on the island of New Caledonia is a fascinating non mammalian example of learned behavior. Adults fashion barbed and hooked tools from leaves of pandanus palms. Adult birds in different parts of the island make different tools. Hunt and Gray in 2003 hypothesized that the ability to make tools is passed on to the young by a process involving social learning. So, certainly, selectable life history benefits occur from tool use. The number of larvae obtained by cross using tools satisfies 20% of daily energy need, providing the fitness benefit that would favor social learning and tool use. These crows appear to be no less sophisticated tool makers than chimpanzees, through the latter is capable of further social behaviors, communicating extremely efficiently with facial expression, body language, and sounds, both amongst themselves and with human trainers under controlled conditions. An equally fascinating aspect of learning in birds is cooperation for food gathering. Indicative of social evolution, cooperation is greatest between those individuals that are more tolerant of their other birds. So, cooperation has been demonstrated under experimental conditions in which parts of rooks have to simultaneously pull on two ends of a rope to raise a platform to obtain food. Birds were classified into those that tolerate their other birds and those that do not on the basis of behavior such as feeding out of the same dish without aggressive encounters. Tolerant birds learn to cooperate more quickly than and obtain the food much more frequently than intolerant birds, 63% of attempts versus 20% of attempts, respectively. Tool use by chimpanzees and monkeys. Chimpanzees use sticks and as tools to obtain food. The scenario, therefore, has developed that tool making in Homo, perhaps also in Australopithecines, began with the use of unmodified sticks and stones, from which the ability to modify sticks and stones arose. In the natural habitat, imitation and the passing on of skills from one generation to the next through learning are obvious in chimpanzee tool making and use. This is especially seen in the way chimpanzees employ twigs and vines in fishing and termites. Termite fishing include being aware of when to fish October, November, although chimps probably know the season at large rather than the exact months. Then locating the sealed termite tunnels, which often require importing the necessary supply of tools from as far as away as a kilometer. Then shaping some of the tools by removing leaves, then biting off the ends of tools to achieve an optimum length, inserting the tool with a proper twisting motion to follow the curves of the termite tunnel, vibrating the tool gently to bait the termite soldiers, and retreating it carefully to avoid dislodging the termite. So, learning this trick tasks takes years. Even a male anthropologist who studied the technique for months was no better at it than an Hawaiian chimpanzee. Similar demanding techniques used in cracking nuts require a chimpanzee to find a properly sized stone or hardwood club to use as a hammer, choose a well shaped tree root as an avail, and precisely portion each nut on the anvil. Nuts from different species must be positioned differently. A hammer must be gripped in its most effective position, then with apply proper force and aimed so that it hits the nut in exact locations to extract the maximum amount of nut meat. Although young chimpanzees generally learn this technique from their mothers by imitation, incidents have been recorded in which mothers actively intervene in their offspring's unsuccessful nut cracking attempt by taking the hammer, positioning the nut, and demonstrating the proper technique. When this occurs in humans, we call it an active teaching. Long though limited to chimps and humans, monkeys have now been shown to use tools. Tufted capuchin monkeys that inhabit Brazilian savanna or forest environments use stones to crack open nuts during daily foraging for food. These monkeys also use tools to dig for tubers and to probe holes and crevices. Bearded capuchin monkeys select the most effective stone to crack open palm nuts, selecting heavier or lighter stones, even when the heavier stones are smaller. Then, a fascinating example of how experience influences survival comes from a study of nestling survival of herring gulls. As a function of the age of the parent birds incubating the young, mortality of chicks, especially females incubated by young parents, is higher than mortality of chicks incubated by older, more experienced parents. So, surprisingly, behavior can also be inferred from the fossil record. Preservation of a fossil in a living position or situation, such as a dinosaur on a nest of eggs, speaks volumes about, in this case, dinosaur reproductive behavior. So, evolution of sexual dimorphism has been used to infer social behavior in primates. Fossilized footprints illustrate a great deal about social organization, as when adult and child prints are found side by side. Then, learn in society and culture. Unlike most other animals, humans transfer information from generation to generation through genes and culture. Speed of human culture evolution was accelerated so much more rapidly than phenotypic evolution that we each gather new experience at a rate many times that of our ancestors. Cultural and sociocultural evolution has a genetic basis but has the added component of cultural process that influence the evolutionary process. In the 19th century, proponents of social Darwinism maintained that cultural differences evolved primarily by natural selection as embodied in the concept of the survival of the fittest. This belief, which justified many social inequalities, was based on the prevailing philosophy That society, which often incorporates non biological goals and value systems, is governed by the same laws as govern phenotypic evolution. Phenotypic and cultural evolution interact at several levels. Many developments in behavioral and social biology over the past quarter of a century are based on the proposition that there is an inherited basis of human cultural evolution, that genotypes predisposed toward cultural development accumulate through natural selection. Then, cultural evolution, the most distinctive feature of the human species is our mental capacity, like intelligence, and consequent ability to learn from our own experience or from the experience of others. However measured, intelligence provides us with flexible adaptive behaviors that are far more complex than those attained by any other species. Humans have the capacity to analyze their environmental experiences, incorporate the lessons learned into their behavior, and create new environments over which considerable control is exercised. But human learning follows a pattern of conscious acquisition of transmission of those behavioral responses that meet the needs of specific situations. Most other organisms with the capacity to learn rely primarily for survival on automatic responses that appear to be hardwired into their nervous system. A good example is ants cooperating to stitch together the edges of two leaves. More than any other animal, humans can acquire and transmit practices and behaviors like culture through social exchanges involving language, teaching, and imitation, both among individuals and between generations. Cultural transmission of learned behavior and of the ability to imitate eliminate the hazards encountered when an individual must learn by trial and error to cope with environmental variables. Cultural transmission allows imitative learning of adaptive practices to be incorporated more successfully into our social and cultural heritage, often developed over more than a single lifetime. Some broaden the term culture to include any form of socially transmitted learned behavior, even if the transmission is by imitation alone. This broader definition extends culture to organisms lacking speech. Evolution of speech and language is discussed elsewhere, and chimpanzees, for example, can incorporate variations in learned behaviors into their community through imitation, resulting in a variety of social histories, traditions that vary from populations to populations and from group to group. 39 behavior patterns, among them tool use, grooming, and courtship behaviors, are present in some chimpanzee communities, even though genetic differences between the same communities are small. A recent cladistic analysis found that cultural differences between populations of a single subspecies of a common chimpanzee were greater than differences between three subspecies, a finding inconsistent with the substantial learned component in cultural behavior. So, because of socially mediated transmission, cultural changes, unlike changes in genetic makeup, are not restricted to vertical transmission from one generation to another, but may be developed through interactions between related and unrelated individuals. The cultural parents of individuals need not be their biological parents, nor need they derived from the same geographical area as their cultural offspring. Consequently, the kinds of isolation barriers that inhibit genetic exchange between biological species do not necessarily prevent transmission of culture between groups of animals. In the case of humans, therefore, we see two hereditary systems: a gene based system, which transfers hereditary information from biological parent to offspring, and a culture based system, which transfers cultural information from speaker to listener, from writer to reader, and performer to spectator. So, importantly, both systems are informational and heritable, and genetic system through the coding properties of DNA, and the cultural system through social interactions coded in language and custom, are embedded in records and traditions. So, evolution through experience is an extension of the method by which humans learn. It depends on conscious agents, humans with brains who can modify cultural information in a direction that offer them greater adaptiveness or utility. Transmission occurs from mind to mind rather than through DNA. Information received from ancestors and contemporaries can be purposefully changed to provide improved utility for ourselves, our offspring, and for others. So, cultural evolution outpasses phenotypic evolution. One measure of how changes continue to affect us is the time it takes to double our collective knowledge, a process that once took many thousands of years but now occurs in a mere handful. So, cultural evolution outpaces phenotypic evolution. The generation time for cultural evolution is as rapid as communication methods can make it. Humans can now move from place to place faster than the speed of sound and transfer ideas at the speed of electrons. Stages in human evolution, such as the softer diets that came with the development of agriculture, can be inferred from changes in the skeleton. The lower jaw becomes shorter and wider with the transition from hunting gathering to agriculture. In contrast, phenotypic changes in humans since agriculture arose seem relatively small if detectable at all. Indeed, the most distinguishable position of Homo sapiens, the human brain, shows no change in size over the last 100,000 years. Why this difference in speed between cultural and phenotypic evolution? Oversimplifying a little, this contrast can be ascribed to differences between the two distinct types of evolution, both of which are molded by natural selection, inheritance of learned characters through gene based, and cultural evolution, inheritance of the phenotype through gene based evolution. The high rate of cultural evolution is in striking contrast to the speed of evolution by natural selection for a number of reasons. Phenotypic or organic evolution occurs through a process of selection, among other forces, on the phenotype because it usually requires fortunations change in DNA sequences, their organization into the existing genome, and selection of the resulting phenotype. Phenotypic evolution can be slow. Each change may take many generations before it is incorporated into the population, although processes ranging from horizontal gene transfer in prokaryotes, phenotypic plasticity in eukaryotes, and the evolution of gene regulation in all organisms greatly speed the rate of phenotypic evolution over than resulting from mutation alone. The incremental process of phenotypic evolution is vastly different from the rapid and conscious selective process humans use to choose among behavioral alternatives through the hereditary material needed to transmit and use cultural information like memory, perception, language ability connects them both. By consciously choosing among alternatives because of their consequences, human minds have become agents of a novel selection mechanism. It is human minds and not human mind because cultural evolution relies on communication among individuals and on group interactions. Cultural evolution is vastly more than the sum of its parts, the products of socially coordinated group of individuals. Cities, daily newspapers, factories are quantitatively and qualitatively more than such individuals could create alone. It is incorrect to assume that cultural evolution has replaced evolution by natural selection in humans. Studies continue to document ongoing selection on human populations, often isolated populations in which selection is most readily apparent. A recent example is the demonstration of selection favoring an earlier age at first reproduction in an island based French Canadian population than seen in other populations. Age at first reproduction declined from 26 to 22 years between 1800 and 1939, resulting in increased reproductive success in this population. More children survive to adulthood now, a well accepted index of selection. Then the human brain. The average human brain is 340% larger in volume and 290% larger when corrected for body weight than the brain of our closest sister group, chimpanzees. Human brains also differ significantly in size from gorilla brains. The average human brain is 267% larger in volume and 341% larger when corrected for body weight than the average gorilla brain. This difference represents evolution of humans and gorillas, both having pursued their own line of evolution and both having escaped from the constraints of scaling of brain to body size so common in other mammals. Then growth and metabolism. The brains of humans become larger relative to body size because human brains follow a different pattern of development than the brains of other mammals or even other primates. In most mammals, including primates, brain growth is rapid relative to body growth during fetal changes but diminishes after birth. In humans, prenatal brain growth is also quite rapid relative to body growth, But this rate does not significantly diminish until infants are past 1 year of age. By adding 12 months of extrauterine development, the first year of life, such rapid early postnatal brain growth effectively extends the human gestation period from 9 to 21 months. Big brains relative to body size are metabolically extensive. Although the adult human brain represents only 2% of total body weight, it can consume as much as 20% of the daily energy budget. For this reason, strong selection is required to increase brain size relative to body size. Determining why or even whether bigger brains are better has preoccupied students of human evolution for centuries. The hypothesis that changes in hominin brain size over the last 4 MY must signify some crucial changes in mental capacity. Nevertheless, literature on increase in brain size relates to body size over evolutionary time. Encephalization is difficult to interpret. Encephalization is not universal among mammals. Proportional changes, proportional changes between brain and body size, like allometry, has proven insufficient as an explanation. So has metabolic rate. A study by Dunbar in 2010 of over 500 species of fossil and extant mammals, showing a correlation between sociality and larger brain sizes, provide a new hypothesis to explore. So does a study in which endocasts of early fossil mammals were plotted against the encephalization quotient to reveal three pulses of brain evolution within mammals. Then, expansion of specific brain regions. The area of the cortex of rat brain would cover a postage stamp of a monkey, a postcard or a chimp on a page, and of human 4 pages, all subjective measures, but the point is clear. It is assumed that the fact that humans were more complex than other organisms and so required more brain cells and bigger brains, and or that the ability to compartmentalize functions drove human brain evolution as it drove evolution at many other levels, leading back to the evolution of cellular organelles. So comparison between regions of the brain among closely related taxa have been used to correlate increase in specific regions with specific attributes of each taxon. Much of this increase in human brain volume is associated with increased area and thickness of the cerebral cortex. Much of the increase in brain volume of great apes is in the cerebellum and frontal lobe, in the region of the brain most involved in perception, coordination, and motor control. Riling, moving beneath the surface to genetic differences, a molecular study identified 49 regions of the genome that regulate neuronal development, some of which are expressed in the neocortex, that are conserved in many mammals, but that diverged rapidly after humans separated from chimpanzees. Next topic, social Darwinism. From the discussion so far in this chapter, it is clear that the simple dichotomy of nature versus nurture is just that simple. Human culture has an inherited foundation, and both culture and phenotype arise from informational systems that evolve over time. Various writers in the late 19th and early 20th century suggested that evolutionary concepts can be extended to society, and that nature and culture share similar evolutionary mechanisms, especially natural selection. These ideas were developed into a body of thought now known as social Darwinism, the chief concept of which are that differences among human individuals and groups arise through natural selection, and natural selection is the mechanism that led to social class structures and to national differences that with respect to economic, military, and social power. These early writers so parallels in the pivotal role of competition in the biological and social spheres. Slogans such as struggle for existence and survival of the fittest, when applied to social traits, enabled English social Darwinists, especially notable proponent Herbert Spencer, to suggest that cultural evolution was proceeding inevitable towards social and moral perfection and approaching its culmination in Victorian society in England. Although the views of Malthus on human populations were crucial for developing this theory, Darwin was opposed to injustice in society and to slavery, and was not a social Darwinist. Others applied Darwin's evolutionary writings to society. The theory of evolution by natural selection is a science, social Darwinism is not. Then Spencer's writing, for example, which range widely across biology, economists, philosophy, and sociology, continued to exert their influence well into the 20th century. Interestingly, although Spencer coined the term survival of the fittest, which implies the action of natural selection, he remained a Lamarckian in response. Spencer's writings, for example, which ranged widely across biology, economics, philosophy, and sociology, continue to exert their influence well into the 20th century. Interestingly, although Spencer coined the term survival of the fittest, which implies the action of natural selection, he remained a Lamarckian in respect to phenotypic evolution until relatively late in his life. Whatever his views on the mechanisms, Spencer conceived of evolution as a powerful force that governed all spheres of existence and therefore justified social and economic policies that supported those who were most morally fit. For many Protestant intellectuals, Spencer's belief in the cosmic power of evolution helped reconcile science for their religion and made his writings extremely popular. In its harsher economic and social forms, Spencerian approach became popular in various circles in the United States, where more than half a million copies of his book were sold, especially through the teachings of William Graham Sumner, the best known American social Darwinist. In 1883, Sumner wrote, "We cannot go outside of this alternative. Liberty, inequality, survival of the fittest. Not liberty, equality, survival of the unfittest. The former carries socially forward and favors all its best members. The latter carries socially downwards and favors all its worst members." Not surprisingly, many wealthy capitalists found such views to their liking, whose father forged the gigantic standard, like John D. Rockefeller Jr., whose father forged the gigantic Standard Oil thus by destroying many smaller enterprises. Justified such behavior to a Sunday school class with the observation that the growth of a large business is merely a survival of the fittest. The American beauty rose can be produced in the splendor and fragrance which bring tear to its beholder only by sacrificing the entire buds which grew up around it. It is not an evil tendency in business, it is merely the working out of a law of nature and law of God. Similarly, for the United States Railway magnate James J. Hill, the fortunes of railroad companies are determined by the law of survival of the fittest. Along with objections raised by others, including Thomas Huxley in his book Evolution and Ethics, the major problem with social Darwinism was its assumption that society, economics, politics, government operates through the same laws as biology and for the same goals. However, laws governing the inheritance of wealth and power in society are entirely man made. The laws of biological inheritance are not. Because they can be consciously selected, social goals can be directed towards almost any objective, poverty or wealth, and socialism or capitalism, for example. Unfortunately, the possibility of implementing social goals attracted individuals and groups who aspire to occupy superior positions over other individuals or groups. Goals for the good of society have been used to justify or reinforce racism, genocide, and social and national oppression. An extreme example is the role played during the 1930s and early 1940s by Adolf Hitler and the racial health movement, the purposeful destruction of millions of people because they were considered members of inferior racial groups. Even in the United States, with its more democratic social lineages, laws were passed during the 1920s restricting immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe because of inferior or undesirable races. Immigration of virtually all Asians into the United States was halted in 1882 by the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which were not repealed until 1943. While economic and political considerations played a large role in the push for immigration restrictions on the United States, racial consideration formed part of social framework under which the laws were promulgated. The United States was not alone. Australia enshrined a non-white immigration restriction policy that came to be known colloquially as the White Australia policy in the second bill passed after Confederation in 1901. Then inheritance of social behavior. Many examples of social behavior have been discovered in a wide range of animals. A female lion will nurse her own cubs and those of her close genetic relatives. When a new dominant male in a pride of lion kills off its rival's offspring, he is eliminating the competition with his own offspring. Both behaviors help to ensure survival collectively, her own and his close relatives' genes into the next generation. Biology exerts influence on social interactions between people as well. The close mother infant relationship is only one of the many behaviors common to all human groups. All behavior, including learned behavior, has a genetic basis, and all behaviors reflect organism and therefore gene environment interactions. Like morphology, animal behavior is shaped by natural selection. Behavioral traits that maximize an individual's reproductive success are more likely to be carried into the next generation than those traits that do not. So, alteration has been a difficult problem for evolutionary biologists because an animal that benefits another at its own expense may not leave any descendant. But even such social behaviors as altruism have evolutionary significance. Selection acts on the fitness of an individual carrier of favorable behavior genes and on the fitness of the genetic relatives of such individuals. Drawing on methods used in population genetics, ethology, ecology, and other disciplines, sociobiology provides a a rationale for us assessing how and to what extent biological changes account for human social behaviors. In his book Sociobiology, The New Synthesis, Wilson in 1979 defined sociobiology as the systematic study of the biological basis of all social behavior, and in a second book on the subject has the extension of population biology and evolutionary theory to social organization. Sociobiology deals less with the immediate causes of particular human behavior than with its ultimate underlying evolutionary function, an aspect developed by Wilson in 1978. Because of the interactions between genes and environment, Wilson said, there is no reason to regard most forms of human cultural behavior as qualitatively different from physiological and non-social physiological traits. Human nature is determined as much by heredity as by culture. The challenge posed by sociobiology is to tease out the mix of phenotypic and cultural evolution, an exceedingly difficult but important task. So, with the help of this lecture, we learned about social Darwinism, cultural evolution outpaces phenotypic evolution, some aspects of learning, society and culture, cultural evolution, and instincts and learned behavior. All these topics comes under cultural and social evolution. So that's all about this video. Tomorrow we will be learning about topics related to this human evolution, like human influences on evolution. Human influences on evolution. So thank you for listening.